There are bad apples in every delicious bunch. In the case of New York State Police, there are troopers who have had sex on the job, who report false information, one who arranged a quid pro quo for sexually explicit pictures. People commit misconduct. The thing is, the New York State Police doesn't have a clear and coherent disciplinary system, and the results are eyebrow-raising. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Long Run Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor in Lake Placid, providing comprehensive wealth management, retirement, and financial planning solutions. LongRunWealth.com. And the Devlin Inn and Suites, Lake Placid, welcoming families, athletes, and groups to the Olympic Village, offering Adirondack mountain views and dog-friendly accommodations. TheDevlinNY.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Wednesday, February 25th. First up, some state lawmakers are questioning the continued use of the National Guard to help staff state prisons. Jimmy Vielkind reports for the New York Public News Network.
3,000 troops are still stationed in state prisons after officials fired around 2,000 correction officers who illegally went on strike last year. The Corrections Department says it's doing everything it can to recruit more officers, and the National Guard fills a critical gap. But it comes with a cost. State Senator Dan Stec is a Republican from the North Country. He says the money could be better spent on more officers, or COs.
The executive budget allocates $535 million for the National Guard. That represents over 4,000 COs if you converted that to CO salary and fringe.
The state has already spent around $700 million related to the strike. In Albany, I'm Jimmy Vielkind for the New York Public News Network.
The New York State Police lacks a coherent disciplinary system, and when troopers are found guilty of serious misconduct, the punishment is often lenient or unpredictable. Those are the findings of an investigation by New York Focus, a nonprofit online newsroom based in Albany, and the New York Times. Reporter Sammy Sussman and his team spent 3 years analyzing thousands of internal files from 2014 to 2024 obtained through records requests. He says they found lax and inconsistent disciplinary measures.
Troopers will commit similar misconduct but get vastly different punishments. In the story, we look at 3 troopers who were caught having sex when they were supposed to be on duty. One was suspended for 8 days, one was suspended for 90 days. And the trooper actually who was suspended for just 8 days had previously been caught taking photos of his genitalia while on duty in uniform. The agency doesn't have a clear disciplinary checklist or a disciplinary matrix that might dictate that if you commit this misconduct, you should get this punishment. And because of that, we see that there are, a lot of officers who've committed seemingly egregious misconduct who've stayed on the force compared to other agencies. And then, you see that serious misconduct can sometimes be met with serious punishment and other times be met with very lax punishment.
And how does the system of discipline in the New York State Police compare with other large police agencies of its type?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the best comparison for the state police, which is an agency of around 5,000, is other very large agencies in New York and around the country. So, the easiest one for me was the NYPD because there's been so much controversy around the NYPD's disciplinary policies. But you look at someone like the NYPD and they have a public disciplinary matrix that says if you commit sexual misconduct while on duty, you will face termination. If you commit, use of a less lethal weapon in a way that's not authorized by policy that results in no injury should result in 10 days of suspension. The state police have faced calls to do that. And actually, my reporting shows that since 2025, their counsel's office has been working to develop that. But the records show that going back decades, that hasn't been in place. And therefore, there's been really no standardization.
There are some examples in your article where, police are seeming to use, very informal means of discipline. You give an example of an officer who used a stun gun or something like that, for 33 seconds. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, sure. So we have a letter. The state police has a policy that they call their troop level disciplinary policy. So they have their internal affairs bureau, which is the professional standards bureau, and cases that go through there, you see these like 100-page reports where the trooper's interview is transcribed. There's detailed documentation of what evidence is collected, how's it analyzed. The state police has a second policy, a more informal policy, the troop level policy, which is that the trooper meets with their immediate commander, their troop commander, and the troop commander in that conversation resolves the discipline. The punishment that comes out of that process is capped at a week of suspension or a week of vacation loss or less. And there's no opportunity for the trooper to appeal. Within that process, as you described, we identified one case that we think probably, according to experts, should not have gone through that process, which was a trooper who first stunned a combative suspect, according to a disciplinary letter, and then held the trigger on his taser for 33 seconds. What's important there also is that the specific taser that's being used, we were able to identify it. It's an Axon taser, and that taser is only, if you read all the safety manuals, it says, they've only tested the taser up to 15 seconds, at which point they believe that use of the taser is linked to fatalities. And he lost a vacation day after speaking with his troop commander, but it's unclear from the letters if his body camera was analyzed, if he was interviewed on the record. We don't have a transcript of what that interview looked like. It's totally different than what might have happened if he went through the really formalized process that they also sometimes utilize.
What has the state police said when you've asked them about this?
From the spokesperson, he says that what we see in these records does not reflect how the agency functions today. Both the state police's spokesperson and the governor's spokesperson kept coming back to this line that they feel that the current administration takes these issues very seriously. Of course, the problem there is, despite the repeal of 50A, a law in New York that kept police records secret, that law was repealed in 2020. The state police is one of the last big agencies in New York State that is not making their records public. So if there was a similar scandal in the NYPD, you or I, reporters can file records requests and find out what's happening in the current administration. The way that I got these records was through a loophole through county district attorneys' offices, because the state police has resisted making their body of disciplinary records public.
Why do you think this reporting, for somebody who's listening right now, average person, maybe sort of sees the state police on the roads or, comes in contact sometimes, why is this, your reporting so important?
I think that, we learn so much about how police agency functions from how they police their own. How do the police themselves? I think is like the running through line for me through a couple years of reporting here about the state police and other agencies. And I think it speaks a lot to integrity in the agency. I mean, I have a couple sources, current troopers, former troopers, none of whom are quoted in the piece, but of course, who I try to speak to as I go about this reporting. And a lot of them say that the state police are perceived, at least within New York's law enforcement community, as being very vigorous in how they police themselves. And what a lot of people say, at least who I speak to for some of these articles, is that they generate a lot of records and they're very vigorous in documenting the complaints against their officers, but that some of the investigations into those complaints really lack that same rigor. And I think the taser case being an obvious example. There's another case that we look at in the files of an investigator, the agency's equivalent of a detective, who was trying to intervene in local traffic courts to help his friend get lenient treatment in return for his friend sending him like nude photos. And most experts in policing that I talk to say that that's something that should immediately disqualify someone from ever working in law enforcement. That speaks to such issues with integrity and credibility. And the fact that that officer faced, a brief 2-week suspension and is back on the job really speaks to a culture where some officers are being punished severely and held to a high standard, but others might not be. And I think, if they're not going to release their files, we don't know what's happening there. And I think we as citizens of New York should.
Sammy Sussman is a reporter for New York Focus. He did this investigation as a local investigations fellow for the New York Times. You can find a link to his complete findings on our website, ncpr.org. More news there all the time, of course. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Saranac Lake and Mark Corey of Watertown. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.